Welcome into this edition of Next Level. I'm Tommy Ashley. This is Greg Barnes. We are live on site from the Man Tower of Don Callahan. Just wrapped up a 3 hour plus National Signing Day commitment show, National Letter of Intent show, Transfer Portal show, all of that stuff for Inside Carolina. If you didn't get a chance to watch that, it is on our YouTube channel. It's also in the podcast feed. But I'm here still with Greg Barnes and Don Callahan, and we're gonna get right into it. Don, this show's about you.
Oh boy.
We've had 3 plus hours
You're not going to have a lot of viewers.
about football kids committing to North Carolina and signing national letters of intent. How'd you get into this? I mean, you are the preeminent North Carolina football recruiting expert out there. How does one become Don Callahan? How did you become the Don Callahan that everybody knows?
So I don't think that there is like this a path that can be followed by anyone else. Just because I kind of started this when recruiting started to become um more, I guess, out of the niche and more mainstream, mostly through the websites and all of that. I'm trying to I'm trying to make this as short as possible because it can be really long. But basically, moved down to Charlotte to come to UNC Charlotte, and trying to kind of find stuff to do. And somewhere along the lines, had a girlfriend at the time, living with her. We start reading about this Chris Leak kid at Independence High School. Started to get a little bit more involved with that stuff. Started to go to high school games. Got involved in that community, mostly in the online community. Decided to make a website that just covered high school football. Met some people, mostly Miller Seyfried. Those remember Miller. And then I actually got fired from my college job at Kohl's. And Miller Miller hooked me up with, you guys might know, Buck Sanders. Yeah, yeah, and a legend. And so Buck asked me for a couple of samples of my writing, sent them to him. He hired me to do just 2 or 3 stories a week for, I don't know, it was a year or so. And at one point I was like, I like this, and decided to take it a little bit more serious as far as um, I guess figuring out what exactly is going on and strategically planning who I'm reaching out to, what recruits I'm talking to, who I'm seeing, what events I'm going to, and that sort of thing. And it just kind of grew from there. As far as my coverage, I eventually became full time with Inside Carolina, and I graduated with a BS in computer science and math minor. Only took 3 Englishes in college, and I'm writing for a living.
Whew. Yeah. Tommy, I've been with Carolina for a long time, as have you. And Don's been here the whole time as well. And I really think Don's path, I was the beat writer, which is a pretty traditional role. People have done that for a long, long time. As you say, what you do is not unique. And I really see it kind of as a microcosm of what Buck and Ben have done with IC, and that the internet era kind of came around. There was this intense desire for recruiting news, and you really kind of carved out a path for yourself. Do you have any inclination when you started working with Miller that this would become a full-time gig, and that you would be, I mean, look, you're the guy in the state of North Carolina, not just for Inside Carolina. Don's getting recruiting scoop over here while we're having the conversation. But did you have any idea that this was possible, or that would be where you are at this young age?
Well, I think because I was so young and naive at the time, I never even thought about it. I think it was more just keep on going, sort of thing. And just, as we talk about a bunch with these high school kids, I mean, I was a college kid at the time. And so I'm not thinking long term, I'm just thinking the next day, and just keep on going with it. It's an enjoyable job. And that's really kind of what keeps you flowing with it, because you're doing something that's fun. It doesn't feel like work. So looking back, it is surprising what has come, for sure. That I'm not the only one who does this full time. There's a lot of other people who do this sort of thing full time, and the fans just absolutely love it. I think the fan bases, the want for this sort of content has only grown. I mean, there's 3 networks now that cover it. So looking back, it's amazing what it has grown into for sure.
Don, North Carolina's wrapping up its recruiting class for the 2023, I guess, signing period. As we speak, we know they've got some more portal guys they're interested in. But let's kind of go back with this class and not get into the specifics per se of each player. But when did you first start working on this class as North Carolina was starting to show interest in this guys? So in terms of when you first started looking at some of these guys they were interested in, start there and kind of walk us through that process to get into today.
So each kid, when I start to cover them, the time is different. There are some 2025 guys that I have on my radar that I have been in communication with. Obviously, a lot more 2024s that I'm in communication with. And it's just a matter of when do those guys kind of pop on the radar, whether it's just simply through having great high school seasons, or they have added some offers, including North Carolina offers. Obviously, the guys with North Carolina offers are going to grab my attention immediately, and I'm going to cover those guys. What I like to do with in-state guys, my first interview is I want it to be on their campus with their high school coach there, so I can kind of explain what I do ahead of time, so that if they have any questions, they typically don't because they're high school kids. They at least know when my number pops up on their phone, they could put my face on there, and at least they've seen me, they've shaken my hand, that sort of thing. I'd love to do that for every recruit, but it's just not possible once you start to get to the out-of-state guys. But from there, it's coming out of their junior seasons, a lot of camps and combines and that sort of thing. That's another opportunity for me to see these kids, evaluate them, meet them again, especially for the out-of-state kids. And then we have 7-on-7s that provide a great opportunity for those sort of things. I'm a very, if you haven't noticed, in-person sort of guy. That's always been my approach. Some writers like to just keep it on the phone, and that works for them. That's great. But I like to try to keep most of my interviews in person. You can't do it 100%. You can't do it nowhere near 100%. But I'm definitely more of a see the kid in person as much as possible and establish a relationship with them also.
Let me ask you a question in that regard. I mean, Phil Longo talked about it. Chip Lindsey talked about it recently about quarterback recruiting. You got to really get to know them much earlier. So I'm going to put you on the spot. What's the youngest recruit or prospect that you've been aware of and had to talk to do your job here within South Carolina?
So usually I do have a line, which is middle school, as strange as it sounds. But this year there have been a few freshmen that I have interviewed, this past season. God, his name is escaping, but he's from Huff High School, a cornerback, starting for Huff High School, which is a huge accomplishment because that team produces a ton of skilled players every single year, but has a bunch of offers. UNC has an offer because they don't typically offer that early. He's a 2026 kid. But I mean, he has Tennessee, a few other guys. I wish I had the kid's name in front of me. But so there've been a couple of guys. Travis Shaw, another example of a kid who I interviewed very, very early on when he was a freshman. He had North Carolina, I think it was the summer before his freshman year, UNC offered. And so, of course, I went by his school a couple months after that. So typically the very earliest, and this is not common, but that freshman year, I have interviewed a few kids.
So Travis Shaw had an offer to North Carolina as an 8th grader, as a rising 9th grader.
It was either as a rising 9th grader or as a rising sophomore, but I'm pretty sure it was as a rising 9th grader.
Either way.
Yeah, either way.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible that the guys get on them. Now, as far as this class, the 2023 class that has come in, we talked about it for 3.5 hours. Who's the first name on this commit class that you talk to? Not that you love, because we know
I
that
thought you were
would
going to ask
be
me
one
who
Chris
I love,
Culliver.
because then you know.
Yeah, I know. I mean, Chris Culliver is going to start sending you checks. When his
Chris
NIL
Culliver is going to
check
get a
comes in.
restraining order.
So who's the first guy that you heard that sort of popped on?
Yeah. So I am. It probably was Tad Hudson. Culver was pretty close. A lot of these guys, the Carolinas has their best 7-on-7 team is the Carolina Stars, and there's kids from Raleigh who go, during the off season, drive every Sunday to go practice with this team and then travel with them around the country to play. So they end up getting the best players, and they get these guys early on. And Tad Hudson played for them. Chris Culver played for them. So I have a great relationship with that coaching staff there. Anthony Boone, former Duke quarterback, he has no problem sending his guys to North Carolina. Sam Howell was one of his pupils. Drake May was one of his pupils. No problem with sending his guys to North Carolina, but he's a great dude, does a great job with those guys. And that whole staff does a great job of saying, I know you're here for these guys who have offers, but here's a underclassman who I promise you will have some offers. And 9 out of 10 times they're right. They introduced me to Chris Culver. They introduced me to Tad Hudson. They introduced me to a bunch of those guys. But I'm pretty sure, Tad has always been a big kid with a very, very strong arm. So it doesn't take, you don't need to be Bill Belichick to see this kid and be like, okay, that's a Power 5 quarterback.
Don, everybody knows about the 5-star kids and the 4-star kids, but a lot of the kind of hidden talents that maybe break through their senior year or whatever, a lot of that's word of mouth, at least early in the process. I know you've traveled quite a bit around this state and the surrounding area. Kind of walk us through that process in terms of building relationships with coaches and trainers and former players, to be able to kind of help you get an idea of up and comers and maybe sleepers that help you kind of be ahead of the game.
So I think this goes back to what I was mentioning about being in person, because once you go to the school, usually the head coach kind of handles a lot of things with recruiting, but a lot of staff, especially, the schools like Huff High School, and Mallard Creek also, they have assistant coaches who kind of handle things, who are more involved with them away from school, or maybe have been training them and that sort of thing. And you don't establish those relationships by calling recruits on the phone. You establish those relationships by going to the school, by going to these camps and that sort of thing. Those guys are great, and some of my different weekly scoops, I pointed out, the night before I was heading down to Charlotte for a week for a bunch of different practices, I had a coach from Weddington High School call me and say, hey, I told you about Will Shipley well before. He was a good player. I got 2 D linemen, 2026 kids, going back to what you're saying. They are the nephews of Thomas Davis, linebacker for former linebacker, playing in the NFL with the Carolina Panthers. Big kids, tons of talent. Come by. I went by there, just kind of hung out for a little bit, met those sort of guys. Those are but you got to establish a relationship with those guys. And as I said, you don't establish those relationships over the phone. You got to be there. You got to be at the camps. You got to be at the schools. You got to be at the practices and those sort of things.
How many high schools in the state of North Carolina have you visited over the last 20 years?
Yeah, so you would think I've visited a lot, but the talent typically stays with certain schools. There definitely are exceptions all the time. Every year there's a couple exceptions, but there's certain schools, and I've been talking about these schools. Mallard Creek, Huff, Richmond Senior in Rockingham, North Carolina is a school I usually go to a lot. Wake Forest High School around here I used to go to every single year. They've been down a little bit, mostly because of new schools opening. But Roseville High School is a school I've been to a lot. So I would guess it's not like a large percentage, just because it just seems like the concentration of recruits, it doesn't get spread out equally, for sure.
With there being so many new schools being built, especially in the Triangle area, and I have the same cases in Charlotte, do you make a point to establish contact regardless of if there's recruits to those particular schools, just to kind of get your foot in the door?
Yeah, so I would love to do that, because that would definitely be beneficial. That it's just incredibly time consuming. I used to do, and I haven't since COVID. I used to hit up the coaching clinics and conventions and meet a lot of coaches that way. There's actually a lot of coaches who I have really good relationships with that have never had recruits. And but because of those situations, I have established those relationships. No, I mean, I would love to be able to stop by a bunch of different schools, and even if it's as simple as just making a kid a profile who might be a group of 5 kid who North Carolina might not sniff. I do take advantage of those opportunities if I do cross them, and I would love to do it a little bit more, but the time just doesn't allow for that.
And here's a random one.
Uh-oh.
How many work-related contacts do you have on your phone?
Oh man, so I mean, we're talking a lot. I know that there's probably a way I can do that. But and to tell you the exact number, let me see. I'll just try it real quick if I can.
If you go to that, you should be able to go all the way down.
It's not as much as I thought. 863.
So, who's the most famous person that you could get on the phone right now? As we're recording Next Level with Greg Barnes and Tommy
Buck
Ashley.
Sanders.
Good answer.
Good
answer.
That's a veteran answer.
Yeah, that is.
He's going to send us to Italy next year.
That is that when you're listening to Coach Clements talk about what do they post on their social media? Are they hyped about offers, or are they posting videos? Don Callahan goes straight to the. He knows what I'm doing here. It's Buck Sanders. Don, last couple questions for me. I mean, obviously you pour tons of time into a class, and you've already done some 2024 work, 25 work. You mentioned a 26 kid, which is unbelievable to me. But obviously North Carolina and schools like North Carolina, they've turned the page already.
Mm-hmm.
Today, they're already looking ahead, and they stay looking ahead. When does it really ramp up for you each class during the year? Like offers and guys that you're going to talk to and identifying prospects that North Carolina may be looking at that you need to run down and all. When's that? I guess my question is, do you ever get a break?
No. So, well, for the holidays, going to get a nice break. But with the way the calendar is set up now with the early signing period, it actually does, for me, make a nice little, in January, once the dead period ends, that's when you start to see the junior days, and that's where the 2024s are visiting. So that's where the 2024 class becomes more of a focus for me. Not that we haven't been, we've been running stories on 2024s for probably a year now already, but they become they jump on center stage in January.
So, best high school player you've ever interviewed? Doesn't have to go to North Carolina, didn't have to wind up at Carolina. Who is the best player when you look back over your history?
The best player, in my opinion,
that
or
you
just
talk to in person?
I mean, I've talked to Todd Gurley. I've talked to Eric. I still talk to Eric Ebron. Switzer. I mean, really anyone major from North Carolina. I played PlayStation. I played NCAA against Mitch Trubisky. Very competitive game. It was so intense we didn't speak during it. So I mean, I'm trying to think of any. Not in person, but like Rob Gronkowski interviewed over the phone. UNC recruited him.
Did you talk to Cam Newton?
Never talked to Cam, but I talked to his dad. And if you remember, his dad gave me a quote about how he had talked to the movers and shakers at North Carolina, and the NC State fans really grabbed onto that. And because of all the stuff that happened with the dad, made some inferences on that quote. But I definitely talked to Cam's dad. I've talked to Cam as a quarterback of the Carolina Panthers, more doing charity sort of stuff or whatever, but never as a recruit, just his dad.
Don, how has the transfer portal changed what you do?
It has. So this time of year is crazy for me as it is, mostly because everything's already kind of settled down. I mean, the vast majority of this class, I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but it's 90-ish% is done by the end of the summer. They do make some additions from the summer until now, but it's very, very minor. But we do so much preparation for signing day from a content standpoint heading up to it. There's a lot of work involved with that. And plus you're always trying to keep your ear out for any, flips, a lot of smoke screens being thrown out there, and you're trying to, find out what the truth is on things. And then you throw in the transfer portal, which is a completely different monster because a guy might not be on anyone's radar one day, pops in the portal the next, and becomes the next best thing. There's a offensive lineman from Rhode Island who was one of the top ranked offensive linemen in the portal. It just blew up. I mean, tons of stories of these guys. North Carolina wasn't involved with them, but it's so hard because so many guys go in the portal. You got to figure out, okay, who does North Carolina really want or North Carolina's really pursuing? And it's always not the obvious choices for a lot of reasons, not because North Carolina's not going after those guys, but there's a lot of variables involved with this stuff. And then these kids, I say kids, but they don't care about the process. It's not cool to them. Getting interviewed is not fun, So you're not going to get a lot of these guys on the phone. We've done a tremendous job of getting interviews on some of these guys, but we're probably only batting 500 at best, probably lower than that on getting some interviews with transfer portal guys. So that makes it even more difficult. So you're relying heavily on sources to get information, and sources are most of the most reliable sources are super busy during this time. So the past 2 weeks have literally been wake up, work immediately, all the way until I'm going to bed, have the laptop on my lap in bed. And I only take a little bit of breaks because, as you guys know, you guys are kids who played sports. You're only taking breaks to go to their games, go to their practices, and that sort of thing. Outside of that, I mean, I literally, and I'm not trying to exaggerate, and I don't want anyone to feel bad for me, not trying to do that because I love my job, but it has been nonstop work for the past 2 weeks since the transfer portal opened.
I don't doubt that. Just having watched you from afar for so many years, I see that. Tommy, a long time ago, Carolina's still done it a little bit, or IC still done it a little bit of late. But 15 years ago, we didn't have Instagram, didn't have Twitter, social media to be able to follow announcements. So what we used to do was we would split up like signing day responsibilities. And there's a couple guys that you would have to track, whatever. I remember in 2007, Greg Little, this is, of course, Butch Davis's first year. Greg Little was committed to Notre Dame. And so I called Hillside's head coach morning of signing day on February, 2007, and said, I just want to confirm that Greg is going to Notre Dame and he's going to sign with them. And he said, well, not quite sure. And I said, what? And of course, this time I had no recruiting experience whatsoever. He said, just hold on. You cover UNC, right? I said, yeah. He goes, just bear with us. There may be news to come out. And I was big news at that time. So I quickly reached out to Ben and Don for them to follow. That's my recruiting story that I have. So Don, what is your, I guess, favorite recruiting story that you've come across? Maybe most interesting? Do you have one or two?
So I have a few, and it's mostly been, all right. So the craziest on location. Do you guys remember Arthur Brown, number 1 player, linebacker? UNC recruited under Butch Davis, John Blake recruit. Because it was so big inside Carolina, flew me out to Wichita, Kansas, the beautiful state of Wichita, Kansas. And yes, very, very snowy, flat as you can imagine. Everyone tells you it's flat. You don't appreciate what flat is until you're there. Okay.
You can like see California.
Yeah. Yes, it is amazing. And that's not even the experience. I won't get into the other one, but where I actually drove through Kansas. But anyway, so the whole plan was to be there for a few days because I was going to spend the next day with Arthur Brown if he had picked North Carolina. We didn't know with 100% certainty. We felt decent enough to where they sent me. But I remember covering the announcement. He picked Miami, went up there, grabbed my recorder, called Ben. He said, see if you can change your flight. Changed my flight, got the hell up out of there. But the two other cool recruiting stories, and these are shout out to some coaches, is Caleb. God, now I'm forgetting. God, he was coach at Havelock. He's a coach at Havelock now, offensive coordinator. I'm forgetting his last name. He's going to kill me for that. When Avery Jones was there, I went by there to do a video interview with him, and it was half day, and he had told Avery to come to his office. Of course, Avery didn't. He went home, but we're waiting there forever. So anyway, so the coach said, Caleb Jackson, coach said that, now I'm second guessing if that's the right name.
Come on, man.
And anyway, he's gonna kill me for this. Caleb King, God, he's gonna kill me for this. Hopefully, he doesn't watch this. I know, so he knows people who definitely will be watching this, so he's gonna hear about this. And he's gonna kill me for this. But this
Don
is
Callahan.
this
Caleb.
is kudos to Coach King. So he's like, "You're hungry?" I said, whatever. He's like, "All right, you're hungry." Took me out to Mexican. We left there, went to Avery's house. He knocks on his door, no answer. Gives me the 1 minute sign. I was like, what the hell is he doing? Goes behind the house, comes back. He says, "Oh, Avery was sleeping in his room. He's going to be out in a little bit." So we did the interview in Avery's front yard. Another similar story like that. Coach at Monroe. This is a Shalik Nat's school. I know you guys got to wrap up. I like to take the photos with the jersey. If they don't have the jersey, that's fine. No big deal. They had the jersey. They couldn't find the key for the lock. So this coach goes and gets a police officer, the resource officer. They get a lock cutter. They cut the lock and got the jersey just for these few photos for this kid. So appreciate both Coach King, Coach Caleb King, God, and the coach at Monroe for being super helpful and definitely contributing to my memories on the road.
Great stuff. We did almost 3.5 hours earlier today on the signing day. We could have done 5. Same thing with this podcast. We could do. It's about 27 minutes in. We could do an hour plus, and we probably will, because I'm gonna get you to share some more stories, because the stories from the road are great, and you too, Greg. You've got a ton. That's your time in Inside Carolina. This has been the Next Level Podcast. YouTube show. Sorry, not a podcast, YouTube show. That's Greg Barnes. Special guest Don Callahan. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley, as well. We'll be back at some point. Happy holidays from the Inside Carolina crew, Next Level, and Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com.